Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Freely Nourish, the podcast that empowers you to break the cycle of dieting by teaching you to nourish your body well. I am your host, registered dietitian Erin Casey, and I am the owner of New You Nutrition Counseling, where we believe that you can reach all of your healthcare goals at just about any body size. So if you are ready to let go of that toxic and shameful cycle that is dieting and weight loss and step into nourishing habits that actually feel good in your body, then join us. We have multiple opportunities for you to join us. There's, of course, always our standard one-on-one counseling where you work one-on-one with me, talk to me through your goals, and we come up with a plan together to figure out the best way to reach them. If that is something that is not accessible or doable for you right now, you do have other options now. We have just launched the Cauldron, which is a group membership service where you pay, right now, it is just $50 for the rest of 2023. So that's not $50 a month, that is $50 period for the rest of the year. So you get 6 months of content for $50. That's pretty awesome. What the Cauldron is you have access to monthly group calls. So we hop on a Zoom call. We talk through things like diet culture, like body shaming, like body image. We also talk through myths and facts of nutrition. It is a space truly for you to open up and explore and process things that are going on in your world around you and get support from people who are of like mind, as well as somebody who has a degree in this. So that's one aspect of it. You also have access to a private Facebook group to interact in the same way if you are either not able to make the monthly calls or you just want extra support outside of them. You also get access to 4 workshops every single year. So part of why the price is a little bit cheaper for 2023 is because we are already halfway through 2023. So you only will get 2 more between now and the end of the year. The first one is coming up next month. Super excited about it. We don't exactly have a title yet, but it is going to hover around basically start to finish how to plan, shop, and prep your meals. In a way that works for your schedule. So that may look very different from different people, but we're going to walk through kind of the basics of cooking. We're going to walk through basic ways to set yourself up for success throughout the week if your weeks tend to be busy, so that you're not just feeling like you're in this endless cycle of, buying food, watching it go to waste, or buying food, trying to prep it, not having time, then watching it go to waste. Or if you're somebody who truly just struggles to conceptualize meals and meal planning, whether that is because your family situation looks different now than it once did, or you're kind of newly coming into your own. All of those kinds of things, I will walk you through step by step, kind of how to create a plan, how to shop for it, what types of things to look out for, and then how to actually execute it. And there's lots of ways to actually execute it, but we will talk about kind of the most common ways so that you're set up for success. And it doesn't feel nearly as burdensome or exhausting. It's also really good for anybody who kind of tends to cycle through the same meals week after week. I know lots of folks, particularly people, actually I would say people with families and people who are single, tend to kind of cycle through the same meals because they feel safe, they're known, you don't have to think about it, and that's great. But it can also get really boring and really dry really fast. So we will talk about some ways to either kind of spruce up those meals that you're already making, or kind of elaborate on them, kind of add to them, etc. So all of that is coming down the pike. We do have a date, so it will be June 25th. Time is still TBD, goodness gracious. So still to be determined. But of course it will be recorded and available for purchase, etc. afterwards. So keep an eye out on that for sure. If you are interested in receiving that for free, in addition to the group calls and a Facebook group access, then let me know. The Cauldron is the spot for you. More news on the meal prep class to come. So today, what I wanted to talk to you about is body image. And this is something that I would say just about every client that I have comes through my door with some semblance of needing to work through. And it is something, frankly, that is very undersupported. I feel like certainly in the field of nutrition, but even in the field of like psychology and mental health, I feel like practitioners in general just aren't equipped to handle these conversations. Certainly in like standardized healthcare, but even in like mental health spaces too. Unless you are somebody like myself who is kind of like specialized and taken extra training to do it, a lot of providers I find truly just shy away from it, which is unfortunate because it's something that I think frankly impacts a lot of us. I don't know. I said this on a earlier podcast a couple of months ago. I don't know a single woman or someone who identifies as a woman. I don't know a single woman. Honestly, I don't know a single non-man who hasn't had significant body image issues at some point in their life. That is certainly very prominent in the trans community, which I think kind of makes sense, right? Like whether it is female to male, male to female, or non-binary, I think kind of being born with a certain look or certain physical traits and feeling as though those do not represent you as you are, kind of regardless of male, non-male, that kind of stuff. I feel that is, obviously very conducive to body image issues, right? Because you feel though the shell that you live in does not represent who you are. Super, super common. Again, a conversation people very much shy away from because they don't understand it. And not that body image can't affect men, cis men as well, but I feel like it's less shameful. But it does happen. It certainly does happen. But that said, there is not a single non-man that I have ever met that doesn't have significant body image issues. There are men, of course, that do as well. And it's, a lot of what I'm going to focus this talk about is going to be largely centered around non-male experiences, just because that is the experience of most of my audience members. Do keep in mind that, yes, of course, this definitely does apply to men. And I think it's, that their experience is totally valid as well. I just think a lot of the societal and systemic issues that drive body image are more prominently felt in people who do not identify as men. So that's part of where this is coming from. But just keep in mind that I can't cover all of this in one podcast episode. It is way too dense and way too deep. But I will say most of my clients are not men. They're not all women, but most of them are not men. And I just feel that I would like to speak to that experience because that's the experience that's kind of collectively bringing us together. And, if you all want another one that goes through the male experience, I'm not a man, but obviously I can still talk to it. But I think, when we think about it, the other reason why I kind of focus on the non-male experience is just because a lot of the drivers of body image issues are actually rooted in patriarchy. They are rooted in this idea that women in particular are supposed to be kind of dainty and quaint, and smaller than men and meeker than men. So like, smaller physically, but also smaller emotionally, smaller, mentally, things like that. Like we're supposed to be small, right? And again, if you are somebody who's physical body does not align with your identified gender, then all of this is going to be even more topsy-turvy, right? Because it's like you've got these, societal expectations of what it means to be, a man or a woman. And unfortunately, that's like still the dichotomy in which we live. And then you have kind of how you feel internally, and then you're trying to kind of grapple with all of that in addition to dealing with all of the societal pressures. And I can only imagine a mess. And, we, especially women, again, we've been trained to believe that we are meant to be the object of someone's affection. And unfortunately, I mean, honestly, even still to today, but certainly, a generation ago, that was a very real thing, right? Like we needed to obtain a man's affection in order to survive. Like quite literally, marriage was survival. You couldn't, even when my mom was my age, like she couldn't sign a credit card on her own. She couldn't buy a house on her own. She couldn't finance a car on her own. She literally had to have a man do that for her, whether it was her father or her husband. You literally were like transferred like a piece of property from your parents' household to your husband's. And that's trash. We know that that's trash. And society has come a long way in terms of like the regulations around that. Like, yes, now I own my own house. I don't have a car loan anymore, but I have, I definitely have a credit card. But it's still so recent and still so palatable because of the way in which just those mere facts affected my own mother's perception of herself. They and all women that I encountered that were her age, that were essentially raising me, whether they were family members, teachers, mentors, etc., they all had that same perspective. They all had similar enough experience and treated me in the same regard, if that makes sense. So I think it's important to recognize that, like, even though no, that's technically not the way it is anymore. It was 1975 before women could establish a line of credit on their own. Like, that is not that long ago. Like, that is less than 50 years. Okay. Like, that is nothing in the grand scheme of things. You want to talk like generational trauma, like that is really fucking recent, right? There's generational trauma surrounding like racism that goes back centuries. Like, 50 years is not enough time for things to have really changed in the way women are treated and regarded in society, despite what the laws may actually be. Then we have this whole issue of beauty standards, right? Again, this applies mostly to women, because again, women are meant to be observed, right? And whether you identify as a woman or just live in a like female body, that's likely the expectation you have been met with, regardless of what gender you actually identify with. Like, people see your body and kind of make assumptions about it, which is another huge problem, but I'll get to that in a second. Right. So like, we have these like beauty standards of, women are not only supposed to be meek and soft and, submissive, they are also like supposed to hit these ideals of like thin, white, Aryan type things. And if your body doesn't fit into that, regardless of like gender, then there's something wrong with you, right? Like, if you are somebody like me who, like, granted, I walk around with a lot of privilege and I recognize that. That said, I come from very thick Irish stock, so I'm a huskier girl, and that's fine. That is something I've loved and learned to embrace. But societally, I was consistently told that I was too large, and I'm larger, I guess, compared to like the average person, but I'm not. I'm by no means in a fat body, and I don't say fat to mean negative. I just mean that, like, I still walk around with a significant amount of thin privilege, but it still affects me too, right? And really, there's nitpicky things too. It doesn't even have to do with just body size. It has to do with like skin tone and acne and like how straight your teeth are, how white your teeth are, whether or not your nails are done, whether or not your hair is done, what your makeup looks like, what fashion trends you're doing. It's just kind of, there are all of these expectations, particularly on women, honestly, definitely on non-men, that it's just kind of, there's so many things for us to keep track of. And it's just kind of like, it's almost like they did that on purpose. It is almost like they knew that we're smarter, and in order to control us, they were going to have to occupy our brain space with something else, so that if we're fixated on that, if we're fixated on shrinking, if we're fixated on fashion, if we're fixated on makeup trends or what have you, and feeling less than, then we will be easier to control. Funny thing, right? And that's not to throw shade at anyone who enjoys those things. I was somebody who honestly, kind of early in my feminist era, really put down, things like fashion and makeup and stuff like that. And honestly, I've now come to love it as an expression of myself, right? Like, there, you feel different in an outfit that you feel suits you well. You feel different sometimes, not everybody, but I do. I feel different when I have a face of makeup on and I know it looks really good. And that's okay. It is wonderful to enjoy and appreciate those things about yourself. And that's actually something I wanted to talk about a little later, is that, like, it's not that you have to refute everything. You have the right to feel beautiful. You have the right to utilize these things that are at your disposal. They just shouldn't be specific to women. And they also shouldn't be something that you feel like you have to do in order to be worthy of love and affection, etc. You deserve to show up exactly how you are. And of course, we cannot talk about body image without talking about the BMI. So if you are not familiar, the BMI, or the body mass index, is a calculation based on your height and your weight, and it determines kind of whether you are in a quote unquote normal weight range, overweight weight range, or obese weight range, or if you're underweight. And there are a lot of things wrong with the BMI. I will not detail them here. There is another podcast episode, a couple of episodes back, that goes through it. I've talked about it on, honestly, probably most of my podcast episodes at this point. So honestly, my usual listeners have heard this all before. If you are not familiar, go back and listen to one of those other episodes. But basically, suffice it to say that the BMI is utter trash. It does not correlate to health. It does not even correlate to what is normal. It was conducted in the 1800s using a very small sample. I think it was like 100 to 200 men, men only, all Aryan, all just back from war. No people of color, no women. So we genuinely have, and like, again, their only basis was to determine like what was average in the 1800s. Things have changed, bodies have changed since the 1800s, thankfully so. But we've not accounted for that with the BMI. Is, there are all kinds of studies that like claim it's associated with health outcomes, but further delineation of that has basically debunked it. Your BMI is not associated with your health. You heard it here first. Are there behaviors that can drive your BMI and your health? Yes. That does not mean that your BMI in isolation is any way impactful towards your health, nor is it impactful towards your worth as a human being. Even if it was impactful towards your health, it doesn't mean that you're less worthy of a human just because your BMI is high. But again, we all have this unrealistic, frankly, expectation. And some bodies do fit the BMI, and that's fine, right? Like the skinny bodies, fat bodies, they're all worthy, right? But we've been taught to believe that one is normal, both by societal, representation in movies and magazines, and just kind of what society praises versus doesn't. And then we also, on a health standpoint, have also perpetuated that same message that larger bodies are somehow not worthy, right? And it's really unfortunate, because then we get this idea in our head of what our body is supposed to look like and what is normal. And that's not accurate, but then that's what we strive for. So like, is it really any wonder that most of us, particularly as non-men, have issues with our body? Not surprising at all, right? So we could go on all day about that, right? I think most of us are pretty aware of the problems surrounding body image, and even like the driving factors for where it comes from. My point in saying all of that is honestly just to help you feel validated in it, and know that you are certainly not alone, because like I said, I don't know a single non-male, professionally or personally, who does not have some sort of issues with their body. And that is a very sad statement, but I think it's also really important that it's a normalizing statement too, because most people feel this. Most people feel this. It's not just you. And it's not because there's anything wrong with your body. It's because there's something wrong with society and what we expect bodies to look like. So I want to spend kind of the second half of our time together today talking about kind of some other big misconceptions that you may not be aware of that may drive your body image, and then also what you can actually do about it. Because as much as we would all love to like flip the switch on the patriarchy and have it kind of no longer impact how we live our day-to-day lives, I think we're all rational humans and can agree that that's simply not going to happen, right? So what can we do about it, right? Because we don't have control over the patriarchy at large. Yes, there are advocacy things that we can work towards, et cetera, but for most of us in our day-to-day, those aren't the things that are most prominent or pressing. So first things that everything that I just said, I feel like is probably not a surprise to most people that listen to this podcast. Hopefully it felt validating, but I shouldn't take you by surprise anywhere. Things that are also normal that you may not be aware of. It is normal for all adults, especially women, and by that I mean biologically female, whether or not you identify as a woman is irregardless at this point. But if you are biologically female, it is exceptionally common to go through kind of a second puberty. It's common for male anatomy as well. It's just less prominent because your hormones don't shift as much. But it is normal for, I think we all kind of have this idea that we're supposed to be the weight that we were when we were either in like high school or maybe even like early college. And then as we get into our like mid to late 20s and even early 30s, we notice that like we're putting on somewhere upwards of like 40 pounds, and that's actually completely normal. It should stabilize. I will say that. So it may go up seemingly, sometimes it's drastic, sometimes it's not. And in women especially, it can be a little hard to tell because a lot of times there is childbearing going on there too. And I think traditionally we've blamed women as like, oh, well, you gained too much weight in your pregnancy, or you didn't lose the weight from your pregnancy. And it's like, yeah, you were supposed to gain weight from your pregnancy, but also some of the weight that you've retained is weight that your body's supposed to retain. Now it's actually kind of interesting because we do have kind of a generation of women who are choosing not to have children, or at least choosing to have them much later in life than their predecessors. And what we're seeing is that like we're all going through that. We're gaining 30, 40 pounds between the ages of say like 25 to 32. And then some of us are choosing to have children after that point, but the weight gain is still there. So it's still a phenomenon that we don't fully understand. So I can't give you all of the biochemical reasons as to why that is, because of women's bodies and nobody fucking cares. And, you know, they're not studied the way that they're supposed to be. But that aside, it is a common phenomenon that we've noticed, and it's not necessarily associated with childbearing. Maybe there's an argument to be made evolutionarily that like it was helped to propagate childbearing, but in terms of like weight gain in your late 20s and early 30s is not, that's common across the board, even in men. It's just something that tends to happen. That said, it should level off, right? Like you should. So let's say you weighed, I'm going to give lower numbers here just because I feel like these are like the expectations people have for themselves. Like, let's say you weighed somewhere between like 130 to 140 when you were in like high school, maybe early college. It's common for you to bump up to like 170 and stay there in your late 20s and early 30s. And that's just kind of like what your adult body is supposed to be like. It's really truly, as of right now, believed to be like a second puberty type of effect. But again, it's not super well studied because, again, we blamed women for this because it's more prominent in women than it is in men. But it also, you know, now we're starting to see much more gender fluidity, which I think is also just like giving us so much more information than we ever thought possible about bodies and what they do and don't do naturally. And then I think also because we're seeing women in particular choose not to bear children until either later in life or not at all. And they're still gaining this weight. So that's normal. So that part's normal. It's normal for you to weigh more than you did when you were 20. And it's also normal for your BMI to be above the normal range because the BMI is just a trash garbage scale. Honestly, most healthcare providers know that at this point. Very few are telling you should get down to like a normal BMI range because they know that that's just not practical for most bodies. It's also normal to gain weight as we age. So that kind of that bigger like 30 to 40 pound bump is normal in kind of the late 20s, early 30s, but it's also normal to continue to gain weight as we age. That's again something that like people don't talk about, or we've blamed the individual. And this one crosses both, you know, all gender types, I feel like. But it truly, it is. It's just kind of like, oh, well, you got, you know, sedentary, or you're now eating too much, or kind of whatever the case may be. And it's just like, or their body's just getting older. And like, that's like, if most bodies do that as they get older, maybe it's not a problem. Like maybe, hear me out. If bodies across the board in different countries across the globe tend to get beefier as they get older, maybe that's just what bodies do. We have no reason, again, if we take out the argument that your weight and your BMI has to do with health, we have no reason to believe that that's in any way harmful. So are there factors that can contribute to weight gain older and later in life? Yes. I would say outside of like your late 20s, early 30s, if you are experiencing significant weight gain in a short period of time, it absolutely warrants having something checked out. I just did the episode right before this is about hormones. There may be something there. Totally talk about it with your doctor, get it checked out. But also know that like to an extent that is normal, right? So I think it's important to know that. And then kind of again, floating back to female bodies, specifically menopause, in addition to pregnancy, are things that are going to permanently change your body. So we talked about the second puberty, but pregnancy, whether or not, outside of that, is something else that anybody who's had a baby will tell you, your body changes. And it does not change back to exactly the way it was. Even if you go back to the same weight you were before, your body is not the same. And it's not just like, well, now things are a little like deflated. It's like your hips are wider, your boobs sit different, your rib cage may even look different. Pregnancy changes your body. It's supposed to. And with each subsequent pregnancy, you may notice more and more changes. Those may or may not have to do with weight, but it also is totally normal. Again, most bodies do this. They carry more weight after each subsequent pregnancy. That's not an abnormal thing. So why are we creating a problem out of it? It's not a problem. Again, if we take that argument away that like the weight is somehow harming your health, because it's not, then there's no argument to be had. It's just, yeah, my body's large now, right? But that's bad because of all of the things we talked about a while ago, right? All the societal and patriarchal things about like why women in particular, but bodies in general, are supposed to be small. So those are just kind of a couple of other truths that you can do, or that you can do. There's a couple of other truths that you may not have been aware of. But now what can we do about it, right? I am such a fierce advocate of saying it out loud and giving it space, right? So if you are having a day where you feel, such a way about your body, say it out loud, even if it's just to yourself. Say it out loud, because frankly, when most of us hear those words come out loud, we hear them not so much as the voice in our head. We hear them as if they were words we had spoken to another person. And most of us, anyway, speak to ourselves in a much harsher and much less kind way than we would speak to somebody else. So the things we would say out loud to our own body are not things we would ever say to somebody else's body. And I think a lot of times for a lot of people, that like literally verbalizing it out loud is that switch that makes you realize like, whoa, that's not a cool thing to say. And once you kind of realize that, you can be like, well, it's not great that I feel that way about myself, but it kind of gives you the whole like, it gets you quite literally out of your own head. I think that's really important. I think it's also really important to acknowledge why you feel the way you feel. If I were to tell you nothing is wrong with your body, and there's nothing wrong with it, it's perfectly healthy, it's perfectly normal, why do you feel this way about it? At first, that might feel really invalidating, but where I want you to go is a step further and say, well, why do I feel that way about it? Is it because there's anything actually wrong with my body? Or is it because of all of the things we just mentioned? Because society is basically telling me there's something wrong with my body. And then there you can work towards maybe like some positive affirmations. You don't have to, and this kind of gets into a little bit of the difference between body neutrality, which is kind of something I'm an advocate of, as opposed to body positivity. So body positivity is like, I love my body. I love everything about it. I love the dimples. I love the cellulite. I love the fat rolls. I love everything. I love the crookedness of my teeth, like whatever it is. It's saying that I see that and I love it. And to me personally, I just feel like that's a little, like, that's great. If that works for you, or if that's how you actually feel about your body, I'm so happy for you. For me, and I think for many others, that feels a little fake and a little unrealistic. It's kind of taking too big of a jump. So if you say, you look at, say, your stomach, right? And your stomach's the area on your body that bothers you the most. You don't have to love it. You don't have to love it every day anyway. But what you can do is say, this is a human stomach. It's perfectly healthy. There's nothing wrong with it. I don't love it today, but I want to, right? Those are the types of affirmations you can do for yourself. Even if it's just neutralizing it, sometimes neutral is a step up from negative. So kind of working towards that neutrality of just kind of like, yep, my thighs have cellulite on them. They sure do. They are pretty, good thighs. They hold me up. I'm able to walk place to place, but they've definitely got some cellulite on them because they are, in fact, human, non-photoshopped thighs. Right. So kind of acknowledging the factors that contribute to the image. So it's not that there's anything wrong with your thighs. It's that Photoshop has made you believe that thighs aren't supposed to have cellulite, and your thighs are in fact human and functional, hopefully. And then also acknowledging that I don't love them. but I don't have to hate them because they are simply human. I think a lot of that can kind of help to neutralize some of that as well. It is also, I think, really important to, and this is so much of why I do this work, it is important to normalize it, normalize how common this is. And that can get really uncomfortable. And this is where I want you to kind of dig deep, but also take your time. So, like I said, I don't know a single non-man who doesn't deal with these things. And that said, most of us are dealing with them in a vacuum. We're dealing with them on our own. And maybe we're bringing them here and there to like certain safe spaces, but again, it's so common for us to hear like, oh, my thighs are just so big, and they're like, oh, try this diet, try that diet, try, whatever. Like, people try to be helpful, and they're in fact more harmful, because they're telling you, oh yeah, there is something wrong with your thighs, but here's what you can do to quote unquote fix it, versus, what are you talking about? There's nothing wrong with your thighs, right? Or, oh, hush, I hate my this, that, or the other. Like, that was like the way of our mother's era. That's honestly a way a lot of my generation has operated too. And like, let's be the ones that change that. That's my ask to you, is even if you bring it up in a safe space and somebody gives you some bullshit answer like that, be like, no, this is what I'm actually working on towards body neutrality. Can you support me in that way? That may not be for everybody. There may be certain people you can't have that conversation with. I get that. But find the safe spaces where you can, and advocate for what you want to say, advocate for what you want to hear, because trust me, my friends are not my family, and like nobody in my life is immune to this, right? I preach about this all day long. They know it, and then they still say things. And like, I will call my mom out frequently. She's a frequent weigher, and she'll like, get mad that the scale went up like 2 pounds overnight, because it's like, no, she fucking drank water the day before. And I will like constantly be like, your weight doesn't determine your validity. And that's like literally what I say every time. And she rolls her eyes at me, and I don't care, because somewhere in there I am planting that seed, right? And now that may not be for you. Again, there may be certain relationships where that is honestly not safe for you to do, or it's just so exhausting that you don't feel like it, and that's okay too. But I do encourage you to kind of continue to normalize both the struggle that you're actually going through, but also the real reasons behind it, because the real reason is not that there's something wrong with your thighs because there's cellulite on them, or there's something wrong with your stomach because it sticks out further than your boobs, or that there's anything wrong with your skin because you have pimples on it. It's, if you want to change those things about yourself, I implore you to do so. But I also think it's really important to, again, accept that these are normal things about being human, and to encourage the people in our lives with whom we have discussions about it to do the same. And if you are looking for such a group, I will once again put in the shameless plug for the Cauldron, which is your community to do exactly that. That does a lot of what we talk about. We talk about how to kind of sit with that discomfort. We talk about affirmations. We talk about body neutrality. And we talk about all of the factors that play into why we feel so shitty about our bodies so often. So again, it is $50 right now for the rest of 2023. Our next meeting will be on June 25th. And you will also get, like I said, you get 2 workshops between now and the end of 2023. The first one will be around that, like, start to finish, how to plan, prep, create meals and things like that. And then the second one, I don't know yet. We will find out. So if you want to have a vote, then come join the Cauldron. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day, and I will see you next time.